Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new series of virtual programming from the Midland Cultural Centre. My name is Eugene. For those of you that may not know me, I'm the General Manager at the Cultural Centre. And this is the first in a series that we've entitled Backstage Pass. And for the first in this series, I'd like to introduce you to one of the hard-working folks at the MCC. As you can imagine, there's a lot of work goes into presenting shows of the quality that we do. And my guest today is none other than Glen Erwin. Well, thanks for joining us, Glen.
Yes.
You have the honor of being the first guest on this series, which I was explaining to the viewers is going to be called Backstage Pass. And
there you go.
Both you and I are surrounded by a lot of technical equipment, so that's very apt. As you can see, I'm right in front of a very large console in the control room of the studio, and you're in front of an image of a nice digital console at the MCC, it looks like.
Yeah, this is actually a picture from one of the shows that we had to set up. Yes.
Very good. Okay. Well, the idea of this video is to give our listeners and viewers an insight into what goes on the day of a show. Of course, people, you know, have breakfast and lunch and they look forward to the evening time when a concert that interests them is being staged and generally show up at 7:30 or 8 o'clock for the show. But the work of the AV team starts long before that, right? So
definitely.
on a typical day with a 7:30 or 8 o'clock show, how would your day start? And
well, Eugene, generally, if it's a 7:30 or 8 o'clock show, my day will generally start around 3 or 3 p.m. Myself and the volunteers will be in there. Although if it's an extremely complicated show, it could start as early as 8 o'clock in the morning. It really depends. But on average, between 3 and 3:30.
And I've seen some shows where we're actually starting even a day before, where there's literally a truckload of equipment that has to be brought in, right?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. A lot of shows, sometimes I'll be setting up the night before, especially if I have to hang lighting, or every show is different. And so, you know, you never know what to expect.
Yeah. And that's interesting. Most audience members wouldn't know that, you know, it's almost like the magic happens once the lights come on, right?
Yeah, all that work we like to call the business end of the show, right?
Right on. Yeah, wow. So even before the band arrives, the team have lots of work to do.
Oh yes, most definitely. You know, it could be a matter of hanging extra lighting. It could be moving or installing soundboards. A great many things. Sound checks, stage settings. It could actually be physically even rebuilding the stage.
I think that one of the things that the MCC is built its success on is being ready and making sure that the artists are comfortable as soon as they arrive and that we're ready for them, you know. Like I bet you after a long flight or a long road trip, it must be reassuring when you arrive to find that the venue's actually prepared and is on top of their game, as it were, you know.
Well, I think that is hugely important. And I know we at the MCC take a great deal of pride in achieving that when the band gets there. It makes them much more relaxed, and it gives us the time to actually do the setup that they need to feel comfortable for the show.
Yeah. And we often say that first 10 minutes after they arrive can make for a great show, because that's the 10 minutes when they kind of assess the environment that they're going to have to work in and who they're working with. And basically, they get comfortable, if you like, in that first 10 minutes. So that it kind of sets the stage, excuse the pun, huh?
Oh, it definitely does, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so we're now at the point where some or other of the musicians arrive. So what's next on the list? Beer, I suppose.
No, that would not be a good idea. Actually, I've never seen an artist arrive at the NCC and want a beer. There's lots of work to do before a beer. Sometimes after they have a beer, but never before a show. No, we need to do a sound check, get them loaded in, plugged in, all the equipment checked, so that we can get that sound check done as quickly as possible so that they're comfortable and relaxed and ready and in the proper mindset to do show. And they need to have the confidence that, and I need to have the confidence that everything is going to work well.
Yeah. Now, most of our listeners from watching, there's a great video on about Garth Brooks at the moment, for example, on Netflix. So most people in the general public probably have some sort of an idea what a sound check is, but I think it's fair to say that it's not just 1, 2, 3 as we see, and that in fact the work starts long before that. So again, for the enjoyment of our viewers, maybe we could step back a little bit before the sound check. There must be some stuff that has to happen after the band arrives, right?
Oh, for sure. After the band arrives, for sure. First thing we have to do is load them in, get all their equipment in. Yeah, so their guitars, amplifiers, and you have to plug all that in and make sure it's placed correctly on the stage. Then it's a matter of making sure everything sounds good. So adjusting
when you're setting stuff on the stage, like is that the first time that you know who they are and where they're going to be? Like, I mean, how do you prepare for that?
Oh no, that could start months before that time. What they usually send us is a thing called a rider,
Okay.
and that could be as simple as a picture of the stage. What amp is going to go where, what microphone is going to go where. But it can also be extremely complicated. Be like pages and pages. Some of the acts, specific microphones, specific amplifiers that they want. It could even be like an example of like, do they want this kind of a reverb? They want a slap delay. And so, we have to look at that. And first of all, we have to make sure we have everything they want. If they don't have it, sometimes we actually have to go and source it and get it into the building for their show. So there could be a great deal of work involved in setting up a show.
Right on. And I suppose really what you're trying to do at that time is get it all set up the way they want it in the positions they want to be in, and get that part done as quickly as possible so that you can spend time making sure it sounds good. So it's like a 2-stage thing at least, right? It's
a 2-stage thing at the very least. And sound checks also can sometimes go fairly quickly if you're lucky. and that that's why you want to be prepared, because you want it to go as quickly as possible. But sometimes sound checks can take a few hours to get everything balanced correctly.
Yeah, I know, like as a musician myself, having toured a lot and played in big venues, that your head is in a funny place when you arrive. First of all, you want to be comfortable and know, as we said earlier, the team are as it were behind you. But I think there's also priorities too. One is that you really want to get the kind of dirty work done quickly, which is getting all your stuff in and set up. But then usually you want to get the sound check done pretty quickly too, for selfish reasons, and that is that the only time you have to relax is between feeling good about how it's going to sound and then showtime, right? So the longer sound check takes, the more it's eating into your dinner time, to be blunt, right?
Very, very true. And dinner is very important before a show, right?
Yeah.
Definitely. You want to get that done as quickly as possible under optimal conditions. And being prepared definitely helps in that.
Yeah. And you must experience, and of course can't talk about some of the issues, but you must experience a lot of like interpersonal and band relationship issues where people are vying for their own space, or one person wants a lot of stuff to happen and the others just want to be finished and get to dinner, kind of thing, right? There must be a lot of interplay there.
There really is. There's a lot goes on in a band. Kind of interesting to watch sometimes, but I also have to help mitigate some of that sometimes and keep things
Yeah.
moving smoothly, you know?
Yeah. I suppose too, as a sound person, uh, to some extent, you almost have to take control. I mean, you're there to provide a service to them and the audience, really. But I suppose you also are conscious of the time, and you're conscious of the fact that, personalities aside, you still have to get the job done. So there are probably times when you find yourself saying, "Excuse me, guys, can we get back to the drummer or whatever?"
Yes. Yeah, that happens fairly often. It is my job to keep things on track, although, the musicians are also aware of that factor. They generally want to get done quickly. But yeah, a lot of times I do have to take control and say, okay, I need this now and I need this now. But I also have to work with the band and be very aware of what they need also. It's a two-way street.
Yeah, certainly appreciate how that feels as a musician. I mean, one of the things about traveling is, every day generally is a new room and new people. So,
Yes.
it's like a leap of faith, literally, when you get out of the van or whatever your mode of transport is. And again, going back to that golden first 10 minutes, I think it's critical, eh?
Oh, it is. It is definitely when they walk in that room, and they see all the microphones in the right place, everything's where it's supposed to be. For them, right away, you can see the relief on their faces because you're right. A lot of times, if they have not been to our venue before, they are walking into the unknown.
Yeah,
and they do it all the time.
I have to say that it's one of the greatest sources of pride for me personally at the MCEC is that I know that we do a tremendous job of this part of it. And I know from all of the feedback we get from artists all over the world who have visited with us, they're always so complimentary about their experience. And, I know I've said to you in the past, no one remembers a good sound guy, but they all remember the bad ones.
and that is so true. They've told me a few stories occasionally.
Yeah,
I get to
it's
know.
almost like if it goes really well, you're the invisible man. If it goes really badly, they remember you forever, right?
That's for sure. That is for sure.
We had an experience, fairly recently with a guy who had been, and I can say who he is because sadly he passed away just 3 months ago. But Artie Midland, who was Van Morrison's band leader for 14 years or something, and I had worked with Artie a few times years and years ago. And when he arrived at the MCC, I mentioned one sound guy's name to him, and Artie, the very shy guy, immediately launched off into a whole 3 or 4 sentences of expletives because he remembered an incident from seriously probably close to 40 years ago where when I was a witness when this sound guy messed up, let's say, and he never forgot the guy's name. So it's a funny old world, eh? So before the band
is quite
arrived,
funny,
you're working off a rider, as you called it, and you might have a drawing, a stage plot, and so on. And so,
yes.
If I want to understand correctly, what you're saying is basically you try and have everything more or less in place before they come through the door. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes.
And that
it's
would
very
take
important.
a number of hours from start to finish, eh?
Yeah, it definitely can take a few hours. Like again, if it's a single artist coming in, it's fairly quick. Okay. But if it's a huge 14, 15 piece band, and a lot of them will have numerous lines, like you might have 2 or 3 guitars, just one guy, microphones. So then, I'm talking 32 maybe channels, right?
Yeah.
So then it can take hours to set up and test it all and make sure it all is correctly working.
Yeah.
Last thing
you want uninitiated, a channel is one connection, if you like, be it a microphone or a guitar. So looking behind the picture behind Glen or the console here, each one of these.
That's one channel right there.
Yeah. So that would control one person's vocal mic, and as you can see,
or their guitar or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
And every single one of those has to be wired up
Yep.
test it, of course, to make sure that
Yep.
it's working. And then
Yep.
we move on to sound check fairly quickly. So we load it in, and presumably the team helps people carry their equipment in, as you said earlier. Do
Yep.
you get some kind of preciousness where people don't really want you touching their equipment, or are they always glad of the help, or how does that work?
Mostly if you want to carry something in, they're quite happy to let you carry it in, and they say, "Great, this is wonderful." We have a wonderful team of volunteers that work at the MCC that work with me and assist me, and I always tell them, do not touch anybody's equipment unless you've been.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can.
I think that's the secret, isn't it? If the owner is comfortable with it and happy
Yeah.
to be, yeah. It's funny. We used to always say that, at the end of the night, the drummer never had any friends,
Yeah.
and at the start of
Yeah.
the night, the bass player never had any friends because
Drummer's usually the first guy to load in, the last guy to load out.
that's
Yep.
right. They got a lot of stuff.
Yep.
Very good. So, okay, we talked about load in, and now you've got a rudimentary setup, and the band are there. They've got all their instruments out of their cases, and so I guess we're moving along now to the part that most people at least have some kind of information on. That would be the sound check, right?
Yes.
So let's say you're doing, keep it simple, a four-piece rock band or blues band type of a setup.
Yep.
So drums, bass, guitar, and vocal. Um, do the band call the shots in terms of what happens first, or have you got a more or less a pattern, if you like, that you would work with?
I generally have a pattern that I would work with. I would generally go through all the instruments first. Balance the drums is probably one of my most important jobs at the start of the show.
Yeah.
Make sure the drums all sound good and all the volumes are correct on each individual drum. So that could take a few minutes. So I usually try to start there.
Right.
Then I'll go through all the instruments, and then I'll bring the vocals in.
Yeah. So again, for the audience, when you watch sound checks or excerpts in movies and so on, you often hear that bang, 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 bang,
Yep.
the drum. And what you're really telling us, that is in fact a big part of the sound check.
Oh,
Because
it's
each
huge.
drum has a separate microphone or more than one, right?
For sure, each drum has at least one microphone, sometimes two,
Yeah.
and you have to make sure each drum is sounding good in the room. Drums can really sound bad if you don't have them balanced right or equalized correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. So then you move on to the other instruments one by one, presumably.
Generally,
And
yes.
then eventually the vocals, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And then I suppose at some time they're all going to play it together to see how they feel about it, right?
Oh, definitely. That once I get everything just rough and dirty set up, that we're happy with the sound and tone of all the instruments and voices, then I'll generally ask them to play a song or two. And while they are playing that song or two, then I'm going to walk around the room a little bit, and I use a portable iPad to do this.
Yeah.
And what I do is I try to balance all the volumes at that point and double check for tones in the sound. I might have to do some fine tuning once all the instruments are playing together, because sometimes tones can clash when they're all playing together, and I have to sort that out also.
Right. Now, something I've seen quite a bit of and experienced in my own life as well is the whole battery issue. People
Batteries.
in the audience don't realize that today's equipment, in particular with wireless and pickups and so on, lots of batteries in use. And
Oh, yes.
sounds like a nightmare waiting to happen. So how do you deal with that?
Well, I go through a lot of batteries. I never use a battery for more than one show. I will leave old batteries in for the sound check from the last show generally.
Okay.
But before every show, just before the band comes on stage, maybe about 20 minutes, I go up on stage, make sure there's all brand new batteries in the microphones and turn the actual microphones on. Also, that's if I'm using a wireless, of course. And whenever I'm using a wireless system, I always make sure I have at least one spare microphone on the stage, ready to go in case we do have an issue with a wireless system.
Yeah. So again, for the lay people, we probably should say that, like, what you see a lot of cables on stage for microphones. Today, there's a tendency to use more wireless microphones, which use
Yes.
batteries, so the risk there is that the battery would go flat in the middle of a performance.
Yeah, it can happen.
Singer in Lighthouse would be singing into a microphone that's not working.
Yeah.
So to ensure that doesn't happen, you swap them all out in advance. I get it. And then a lot of instruments use batteries. Certainly, as an acoustic player, I know like all of our guitars and all use batteries. And I've seen riders where, in fact, touring musicians will actually have on the rider that they want the venue to have spare batteries for them.
Oh, for sure. Very important. Nothing worse than a guitar that's on stage and the battery is dying in it. It will sound very bad very quickly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I suppose if you look at it from the point of view of a musician who's out on the road, you know, they played the evening before in a different city, maybe the battery was starting to show signs of dying, but of course they've been in a bus all day or whatever, so
Yeah.
you know they're looking out the window at the journey, if you like. So then they arrive at the venue, go, oh, I forgot the battery, right? So
Yeah.
I guess by the venue having them, it takes the pressure off, right?
Yes. And you know, I've only ever had it happen once, but I have had an artist's guitar battery, you know, die halfway through a show. We literally had to change his battery. As a musician, you might not remember when you've last changed the battery in your guitar either, because they'll last for months, right? So it's all, you got to have that spare battery there, just in case.
Yeah. I mean, in my case, because I certainly don't play that regularly, I tend to change the battery if I know there's something big coming up, just to be sure, because you're right, you can't necessarily remember. And I always would have spare batteries, but I totally get that someone who's, you know, doing 6 nights in a row or 20 nights in a row for that matter can be caught short. Totally makes sense, you know.
So always gets to be prepared.
Yeah, I guess you're saying there's a bit more to sound check than 1, 2, 3.
Oh, definitely more than 1, 2, 3. It's 4, 5, 6, and 7 sometimes.
Yeah,
it's quite a job.
Yeah, so one of the things that people, and I'm trying to lead you a little bit here, Glenn.
That's fine.
One of the issues that people may not be aware of with sound in general, of course, sitting in the audience, you know, you're interested in how it sounds to your ears, and quite rightly, that's the experience that you're paying for. But it's probably worth saying that in some ways that's the easy part of the AV job, right?
It is.
People may not realize that when the musicians are on stage, in fact, they don't even hear that sound. Is that a fair comment?
That's very fair. Quite often they do not hear the sound in the room. They don't hear what the audience is hearing. Totally separate.
Okay, and that's where all of the monitor speakers that you see in front of mic stands and across the front of the stage come in.
Yeah, that's what those do. So that's so they can hear themselves and each other. So with those monitors, I can mix all the different instruments to each one of those speakers individually, so that each performer can hear himself and the rest of the band, which of course is very, very important, right?
Yeah, it's critical for the performance, right? Because
it is.
They all want to hear one another and themselves, and they want it to sound natural so that they can play louder and quieter and get the dynamics and stuff. Yeah.
Setting that aspect up of the show sometimes can be the most difficult part of sound check.
Yeah. I think most audience members really wouldn't see that side of it or realize what that is. You know, I'd say probably a lot of people see the monitor speakers and just assume it's what they're hearing. They don't realize it's a totally different mix, right?
Yeah, that's for sure. Totally different.
Yeah, I know. Again, you know, touring myself, that 99% of the time, you know, when you go out to play, you're totally relying and trusting that the sound folks are giving the audience what you think your band sounds like, but you
For
can't
sure.
control that. So the only control you really have is during sound check to make sure that everyone on stage is comfortable with that mix, the monitor mix.
Most def.
Yeah.
Most definitely. Some bands do though like to have a monitor on stage that actually reflects what the room is hearing, so they get a little taste of that also.
Yeah.
So that sometimes we do that.
And the other thing, and again, this goes back to batteries, is for the last 20 years or so, people have a lot of times been using what they call in-ear monitors, which are almost like an earbud, where
Yes.
instead of having a big speaker, it's piped into their ears directly, right?
Yeah, for sure. That's becoming more and more common.
Yeah.
I'm seeing that quite often now. Yes.
Yeah. Very good.
And for a sound person, it actually, in some ways, that is better for the sound man and easier for them to work with, because then there's not as much volume coming out of those monitors on the stage, which in itself can cause problems. Examples of, a mic is too close to a loud monitor can cause feedback. If they have an in-ear monitor, that problem is gone for me.
Yeah, their ears would probably bleed long before you get feedback, right?
Well, that's the one thing. If somebody's using an in-ear monitor, when you make a change during sound check, you've got to go very slow and very subtle.
Yeah, for sure. So again, for the lay person, I guess what you're really saying is that the monitors on stage, if you take a large band like Lighthouse, great Canadian band who've been at the MCC, of course, you're really mixing, that's to say, balancing between guitars and vocal and all those many, many lines. You're doing that for the audience. Oh, I think we've lost Glen. Yes, I think we have lost Glen. So maybe at this point, we'll wrap this interview up, and I've no doubt there'll be a part two, because we still haven't got to the start of the show. Certainly hope that you all find this interesting. I know I do, both in my role as GM and also as a lifelong musician and recording engineer too. I'd like to finish this segment by saying that, we are so grateful to all of the wonderful volunteers that help keep the wheels on the bus at the MCC. And a lot of the jobs that our volunteers do are invisible almost to the audiences and to the public. Of course, when we arrive and give our tickets to ticket takers and ushers, both of which are very important jobs, those folks are out there in front of the audience and easily recognizable. But there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes, such as the AV team's role and house managers and so on. So my hope is in future episodes of this video series to highlight some of those roles and give the viewer a bit of an insight into what they entail. I hope that we can get Glen back to maybe do a second part of this, but it would appear that we've actually timed out. And I'd like to thank you all for watching, and look forward to seeing you again. In the meantime, stay healthy, and please do check on our website and on Rogers TV for all of the great virtual programming that we're bringing to you during this pandemic. We hope to soon enough be able to bring you some live entertainment again, but we certainly, I think, need phase 3 of the pandemic recovery to kick in. In the meantime, all the best. Bye.